So I wasn't able to find any YouTube videos on how to disassemble a magazine Lee Enfield. There may be some out there. I wasn't able to find any just searching around. So I decided to put together a video on how to disassemble the Lee Enfield Mark I, just so individuals will have a reference point how to take one of these apart. So some parts I won't be disassembling, as I won't be including in this video the back sight here or the magazine catch, sear spring, anything that's in this part of the rifle, simply because for most cleanings that's not required. So I'll be taking apart the rifle just enough to be able to clean it and put it back together. The reference I'll be using for taking this rifle apart is the 1912 instructions for armors, and the instructions can be found starting on page 24. I will be time stamping specific steps, so if you want to skip ahead in the video to a certain step in the disassembly process, just jump down to the description and you'll see the timestamps down there. And when taking apart really any milsurp, I always recommend getting a good screwdriver set. I got this off of Amazon. It wasn't too expensive. It's a Real Avid is the brand, and it comes with a lot of different size flatheads, which is really helpful in getting stubborn screws out without damaging them. So I highly recommend getting a screwdriver set like this. This one also has a little tray here that's magnetic for small parts. And it also has on the right hand side there, you can see it doubles as a smaller screwdriver, but it also fits in this slot here in the screwdriver if you need a little bit of extra leverage. So the first thing that we're going to do is make sure this rifle is not loaded. What you're going to do that is you're going to open the bolt, and you're just going to look inside the chamber here. I just use my finger, and there's no round in the chamber. Make sure that the magazine is also empty as well. Once you've done that, go ahead and close the bolt. The next step is we'll be actually flipping this rifle over, since the screws are all facing the left side of the rifle, to be able to take them out. Now the first step calls for removing this top handguard. I'm actually going to wait on that until a little later in the process, just because I do see some little cracks here and there's a piece already gouged out of it. So I don't want to try to pry this off using the method that's in the manual. I'm actually going to disassemble the rifle around it first and then take off this top handguard once I get the foreend off. All right, so skipping over the top handguard, we're going to skip to the next step, which is to remove the nose cap screw and the nose cap. So getting our screwdriver here. I always like to apply really good downward pressure. And if you got to lean into it, it's just starting to come loose. All right, so I got the screw out. This one had some really kind of gummed up thread, so it took a little work. So the next step is you're going to tap this off. So to remove the nose cap, you can just simply take a brass punch. Always use brass, don't use steel. Steel and steel can obviously damage the metal in the rifle. I'm just going to tap it off. Just gentle, hit multiple areas. It's nice to see the nose cap's been removed. You can see the wood. It's in decent shape, definitely needs to be cleaned out though. So the next step is to remove the rear band here, as well as the screw rear band that holds in the sling swivel here. So I went ahead and selected a good head for this screw. Just after a good firm turn, it came loose. You can always apply some good downward pressure. Helps keep the screwdriver from jumping out of the head of the screw here. Now this is very similar to the screws you find in Martini Henry. Looks almost exactly like them. And one of the issues you may find is that the head here might actually get rusted and get stuck inside of the band here. So sometimes it helps just to tap it a little bit with a brass hammer, or let some coils sit in there for a bit to loosen it up. So go ahead and remove the sling swivel. And I'll put all those small parts on a little magnetic tray. Now to remove this band, you want to be really careful. You don't want to basically pry it open and bust it open. So you just want to kind of really just kind of like push it. I use my fingers just to be careful. Just kind of push it until it just opens up enough to clear this pin right here. And just like that, you can see the rear band is now removed from the rifle. Now, a cool feature that you can see on this Lee Enfield is they actually added a slot here. You can see this little slot right here in the nose cap. So if you turn the nose cap up, you can actually slide this right off the barrel of the rifle without having to remove the front sight here. So it's actually a pretty ingenious design to be able to get this off without having to remove the front sight. Now the next step in the manual is to remove the magazine right here. To do that, just basically push down on this catch right here, and the magazine should just come right out. You can see this one's not too bad. Definitely needs to be cleaned though. Once you have that out, you're going to remove the front screw here in the trigger guard. Just carefully turn this. Pretty much came loose. Sometimes these can be a little stubborn. If you do find they're stubborn, just some coil always helps. But just having a good screwdriver set, again, just really helps with these types of screws. Alright, next screw we're going to remove is this little screw right here on the trigger guard. So always get a really good positioning on this. Make sure that your screw head is firmly seated and you're pushing downward on it. And you can see it starting to turn. Keep that pressure on it. This is a screw that you can easily damage on any of the Enfield rifles. You may be really careful with this one. If you round it, it's going to be really hard to disassemble the rifle. Put that in the tray. Now this trigger guard, you basically can just put your fingers inside the well right here for the trigger, and just you're going to have to pull up. So as I pull upwards, basically pulls that right out of the rifle. So you can see now I have the trigger guard removed just simply by pulling up. You can see the trigger inside the guard there. Set that aside. Now the next step is to remove the foreend. And you want to make sure you do this by pulling straight up. You don't want to pull the foreend sort of backwards at an angle from the front here. So if you try to pull the foreend off by tugging back and up on this, you're actually going to damage the foreend because you actually have to pull it straight up to account for the magazine catch here and the mechanism for the trigger as well. So you have to pull straight up. Now you might have issues with getting this out because it's pretty tight. And if you do, you can put it into a padded vise and basically just tap the foreend here with a block of wood on each side very gently with a rubber mallet until it basically pops loose. Now in this case, this just kind of came out. I just had to put my hand here, hold it by the butt here, and just kind of pull up, and you can see the foreend just slides right out. You can see here is the trigger mechanism. You also have the underside of the barrel here. You can see pretty dirty. Have to clean it out to see its overall condition. Looks mostly like it's a bunch of hardened grease and crud versus any pitting or anything though. Now I saved the top handguard for later in the disassembly simply because I wanted to make sure I could get it off very carefully. All right, so having set aside the foreend, what I'm going to do to get this top handguard off is you can see there's these two clips here, which basically clip it onto the barrel. Now typically you would get like a screwdriver or some other instrument, just come in from the back here and pry it off. But you can see it's already damaged there, and I didn't want to risk damaging it further. So now that I have the forend off, I'm just going to very carefully put my fingers on each side, the top handguard here, and just very carefully pull it off. You can see it's already starting to come loose. Just very, very carefully pulling this off. All right, I've removed it. You can see that no damage was caused using that technique. Typically you do want to try to pry it off first, but again, with the damage right here, I didn't really want to stick anything underneath that. And I saw this little surface crack here, so I didn't want to try to damage this any further. So typically they use some kind of like leather washer or something to protect the bolt inside the stock. Looks like the Ethiopians sort of improvised and put like, looks like a cotton ball and some just pieces of fabric and stuffed it down in there. So able to pull all that out, just kind of a brass rod hook at the end, and just kind of pull all that out of there. So I'm able to access the stock bolt now. All right, so I got the screwdriver in there and just holding down on one side of the rifle for leverage. You want to just kind of turn it, and this could take a little bit of effort because this hasn't turned in probably 100 years. And it's starting to break. So I'll go ahead and unscrew this. All right, so I got the buttstock off, basically unscrewed it. And as I usually see with Enfields that are especially dirty, the stock bolt is basically just stuck. So the way I remove this is I just get a really good size brass punch and just basically tap this out. And if it doesn't fall out by the time the brass punch goes all the way in, I just get another brass punch about the same size, or I just get a really thick brass rod and just tap that all the way out of the buttstock. So I'll go ahead and do that. One of the reasons this probably loosened pretty easily is this is a wasted bolt. You can see that it just sort of tapers down back up here. Some of the older stock bolts were just a straight cylinder, and the issue with that is around the middle of the stock bolt here, it would start rusting and corroding and expanding and actually get stuck inside the buttstock. So this wasted bolt is actually a pretty well improved version of the just pure in the cylinder stock bolt. One of the reasons I kept the bolt in is the manual does say there's certain steps that are easy to take apart the bolt if you leave it in the rifle. However, this little catch here that keeps the bolt head from popping out is very gummed up, and you can see if I try to remove the bolt head, it's basically just stuck. So I wanted to clean all this out before I proceed with trying to take the bolt out. Now work on getting this bolt out. I'm going to loosen this little screw right here that holds this in. I brushed away some of the gunk that was there with a brass brush. That's really important, again, to use a really well-fitted head on this screw. So this one's pretty thin and tapered, so it should work pretty well. All right, so I loosened this up just enough to get this to move freely. So I should be able to get the bolt out. So as you can see, the bolt came right out. Basically just with this being looser, I was able to pop off and be removed from the rifle. That's probably the safest way to do this. If you ever get a bolt head that's stuck and won't rotate out, it's just to loosen this piece right here so it can actually slide out. All right, so to take apart the Lee Metford bolt, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to move the bolt head, which just basically will screw right off. All right, now to get the firing pin out, I use this little tool here. It has these two teeth. You basically slide it inside the bolt here until you feel it grip the firing pin. And then when you see it start turning here, then you know you have the firing pin. You can see it start turn there. You basically just unscrew it. You see the firing pin come right out. And then the rear cocking piece here will also slide out. and you have the bolt body as well. And then the spring just basically comes right off of the firing pin. I also want to remove the spring and follower from the magazine. And the way you do that is you just push down on the rear of the magazine here. You see it actually just slides right out. And you can clean the inside of the magazine body as well as the spring and the follower. The last thing we're going to remove is the magazine cutoff. You can do that. There's a little screw right here. So if it's gunked up like this, just take a brass brush. Just brush all that off. You can see that screw head's now visible. We're going to use a kind of a smaller size head for this one. First we'll wipe out some of that gunk. Holding the rifle steady. This one looks like it's actually pretty loose. Go ahead and unscrew it. Remove the screw. Now these screws are not cheap, so you want to be really careful not to lose one of these. Now to remove the magazine cutoff, simply just pulling it out from the end here that screws into the rifle and it just slides right out. Just a quick look at the rifle, looks pretty dirty. Definitely have to clean this up. Just lots of hardened grime on it. Does look like a lot of the finish might still be remaining, but we'll see how that goes. You can see in the inlay here, just kind of some hardened grease, but for now I don't really see any damage or anything. So what isn't part of the steps covered in manuals, I am going to remove the volley sight here just so I can clean it out. So to do that, I'm just going to unscrew it right here. Just getting a fairly wide head. Now this isn't a wood screw, it actually screws into the other side of that volley sight, so it is a screw that goes into the metal side of the rifle there. The volley sight is, so always a little wary of removing wood screws. You can see that comes right out. Now to remove this, you don't want to try to like pry it out, you'll damage the wood. So the best way to get this out is you get a thin brass rod, put it through the wood so it presses up against the other side where that sight is. And then just holding it steady, just very gently, just tap it with a brass hammer. As soon as it starts coming loose, you can just flip it over and just pull it right out. And you can see you definitely want to clean this because it has that metal on wood contact. You can already see there's some corrosion developing there and you don't want it to damage the stock. And what's really neat about this is you really can't forget how it goes back because it's shaped very distinctly and the holes here pretty much clue you in on how that goes. So hope you enjoyed this video of disassembling the Lee Enfield Mk. I will be boiling and carding these parts just to try to restore any finish that's left on them. I'll be working on the wood, just cleaning it up with some linseed oil, and then I'll also be cleaning up the receiver and the barrel, as well as cleaning out the bore. So once I'm finished cleaning all these parts up, I'll do a video of all the parts and their post-clean condition. I'll then reassemble the rifle and show you how it all looks. Looking forward to doing that. This should turn out to be a pretty interesting project. If you'd like to see that video when it comes out, feel free to subscribe. If you have any questions about the disassembly process or any questions about this rifle in general, feel free to drop in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching.